Good evening. Welcome to Healthy Minds and Healthy Lives with myself, Hector.
Good evening, Bram.
And we have an extra very special guest, Nicole.
Hi.
Now, Nicole, excuse me if I don't get this right. Nicole Alstrand?
Alstorn.
I do apologise, even though I wrote it down, but I have put it on the computer right. Hello to Facebook Live if you're watching. You are a life coach and spiritual teacher.
Yes, I am.
Would you like to inform me and everyone else listening a little bit more about that, please?
A little bit more about that.
A little bit more about that, please.
Well, what I do is I'd like to say that I hold the hearts of the leaders of a new world.
Yeah.
Which means that those leaders, CEOs, managers, business owners who don't really feel like they're like the more traditional management style is their style, and they're seeking for new ways to run their business or to run their team. And I work with them because usually what they are missing is a spiritual equation in their work. So I bring that spirituality into the business world, basically.
That cannot be a bad thing.
No, I think it's very necessary.
No, we were just having a very interesting conversation off air, which I'm sure we're going to get to later on. But it was about the difference between positive thinking and negative thinking. And what did you call me? Negatively motivated.
Yeah.
You did, didn't you?
Because you got out of bed for not
money.
getting sacked. Exactly. It's like I get out of bed because I won't get sacked.
I mean, we will go on to this later on.
Yeah.
So I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I did think that was quite funny. That was negative motivated. I like that. I really do like that. Anyway, my friend Hector, how are we doing, buddy?
I'm very good, thank you, Bram. Very, very good. Okay, so this evening the theme of the show is we're going to be what we've been doing so far with the show, as you know, and listeners will know, is we've been looking at mental health from a fairly traditional perspective, I think, in terms of the way that it would work traditionally in most counselling situations, but particularly in the kind of NHS kind of environment. So we thought it'd be really, really interesting just to have a different perspective on what do we think is mental health, and different ways of looking at it, and maybe different ways of kind of approaching helping people with any kind of difficulties with their mental health. And hence Nicole has very kindly joined us, and I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation this evening. And as always, we're going to invite everybody who's listening or watching via the Facebook page to please message in any comments, any questions. We'll try and get around to answering on any of those. So that is the theme of the show for this evening. Okay, so maybe we could start then, Nicole, with what do we think we mean by mental health?
Yeah.
That's not a bad start point, because that is the theme of the show. So from I've got a sense of it, I think, from my work and my training and stuff. What, from your perspective, what would you mean by when we talk about kind of mental health?
Well, it's just before we got on air, I just said to you, like, for me, mental health, the word or the words mental health actually have a negative association. So they have for me, when I think of mental health, I think of the depression or the bipolar, or all the labels that we put on people who might struggle with mental health. So in the lead up to this show, I was contemplating for myself. So if what would be we are very good in recognizing what negative mental health would be, or how we recognize people who struggle with mental health. But how would you recognize people who are very mentally healthy? Okay. So that raises then the question: what is being mentally healthy, and what does mental health mean? So for me, I don't know, the actual definition of mental health depends on how you look at it, but for me it says something about the state that your mind is in, or that the way that you have a strong sense of rational and possibly also of yourself, and who you are and what you stand for. And I think that is a very spiritual approach as well. It's a lot of things that I bring into my work, and what I do is for people to really get into what it is, who are they really in truth. And who are they underneath all the conditioning and all the things that other people might say that they are? Who are they, and what do they believe in, and what do they stand for? And I think that if you really know that, and you're really centered in that, and you're grounded in that, that you're very mentally healthy. and very strong,
Okay.
which is something else as being stubborn or being strong-minded. So there's very different. I know it's just something that I was contemplating about.
Okay.
So.
No, I think that's a really good point, because we were talking the three of us and then now we're putting it out to the audience, and hopefully we'll get some feedback on the Facebook page. That, what do we mean by mental health? As Nicole's saying, it's a kind of often got connotations. If you say mental health, you assume that there's some kind of problem going on with somebody, and then I was saying that there's now a kind of school in psychology where they talk about positive psychology, and they're really interested in resilience, which I think is the same sort of thing what you're talking about, maybe just using slightly different words. Why in adversity are some people more resilient to being able to manage those difficulties compared to other people? And I think that's kind of what you're saying. Yeah, would that be fair to say?
Resilience, I think, I find in my line of work that when you are struggling in any way in your life, that it's usually got to do with some point of doubt or uncertainty, which you could label as a mental health issue. Obviously, that brings up all kind of emotions. So the emotional awareness is a big part of that as well. And then your emotions actually give you a very clear point of reference as to where you are mentally. If you're feeling really crap, that's usually because there is a thought underneath it that is not necessarily suiting you or serving you on a mental level. Whereas if you feel really good, I would say that your thoughts are very positive and they're elevating you and they serve you. So for me, you can look at that as something that has to do with mental health, but there's a very strong spiritual approach in that as well. Spirituality meaning, okay, so what can you, who are you again? Who are you? And are you in course someone who looks at life in a negative way or in a positive way?
Course, yeah.
And for me, spirituality is about believing that in truth, life is meant to be a joyous experience. So can you align your thoughts with that belief, with that faith, and then using that faith as a way to pull yourself out when something happens? So even if something happens, and this is where resilience comes in, is to continuously believe, okay, but life is meant to be a joyous experience. So if this happens to me, what does that mean? And then you go into the self-reflection, the self-awareness, without getting into self-judgment and self-loathe. So I think that's where the line is that if you get into self-judgment and self-loathe, that again says something about how you look at life, positively or negatively.
Is it a slight little bit of, not self-loathing, no, but a little bit of maybe not self-judgment, maybe self-awareness?
Yes. I like the word awareness.
Yes, that's why I thought very long and hard about it.
It's actually, I didn't even mention this to you, Bram, but I've just today launched a new modality that I've created called infinite awareness.
Yeah.
And which I'm sure you might have just picked up from my website. Then.
No, I've been chatting. I'm
so
on Facebook.
The word awareness
live,
literally just
literally, I was scrabbling around in my brains, going, no, you can't do loathing, can't do negativity. We're trying to be positive. So that's why I thought awareness.
Well, you're more than welcome to do negativity, but I'm really good in making it positive.
Oh, it's gonna be a long show.
I tell you what, can I just dive in here, because I know that a lot of your approach, Nicole, you talk about kind of spirituality. Can I just sort of say, what do we mean by spirituality? Because I think that is something that could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And I'm going to be a bit devil's advocate. I think for many people, we might think, oh God, spirituality, they're talking about religion. From your perspective, to start with, what do you mean by spirituality?
Spirituality for me has not necessarily got anything to do with religion. Actually, I wrote a piece about it the other day saying that for me, there's a big difference between faith and religion. And so faith for me stands for believing in yourself and finding the strength within yourself. Whereas what I see a lot of religions do is referring people to an external source. And for spirituality for me is really is to go inwards and to look inside of yourself and find that strength within you, which I think makes you a lot more resilient, because then you don't need anything or anyone else around you to make you feel happy. So spirituality for me is to find the strength within you and find what it is that makes you happy intrinsically, so that you can be happy on your own and then share that happiness with the people around you. I think that's how you are.
Cool.
I think that's the most beautiful gift you can give anyone.
I agree.
Is to share your happiness.
We've had a question come in for you on Facebook, Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't left a name, so ever please put your names to questions. And of course, unless you want to be hidden. But then, kind of on Facebook Live, so you're not really being hidden anyway. Just tuned in. My question: what practical day-to-day efforts can we make to change our potentially negative thought patterns?
That's a very nice question.
That's nice, isn't it? Yeah. I'll shall we go to a tune while you think about that?
I can answer
that. Yeah.
Go on, Nicole. You
well,
go. Yeah, go.
What I believe is that there's the so-called gap that we see between a positive and a negative approach. For me, lies in the emotional awareness, and so to become really aware of what it is that you're feeling. And what I see is that a lot of people look at their emotions as either negative or positive.
Yeah.
Whereas within the negatives, within the negative emotions, there's a whole range of different kind of things that you can feel, and within the positive scope, there's a whole range of emotions you can feel there as well.
Yeah.
So to become aware of what you're feeling. So when you again, awareness, it starts with awareness, is to train yourself on becoming aware in the moment when you're thinking negatively about yourself. So say that you're in front of the mirror and you look at, this is something that I see a lot of women do. That's why I bring it up.
It's all right, men.
I did it because I lived a life. I was severely obese. I've been looking in the mirror for almost 10 years, every single day, hating myself and disliking myself. So I know what it is like to stand in the mirror and just not liking what you see, and to get yourself out of that loop is such it can be such a struggle. Yeah. But to stand there and to look at yourself that way, for me, in my experience, the only way to get out of there is to really feel what it is that you're feeling. And this can be so painful, which is why a lot of people avoid it and want to avoid it. Yeah. But you got to go through the pain to get into the pleasure.
Yeah, no, I agree.
You got to go feel that pain, feel it, because the moment you feel it, it loses its grip on you. And then you can start looking at what is the mental belief underneath it. And this can be anything. It usually got something to do with unworthiness, but in my case, it had something to do with feeling too much as well.
Okay.
And then when you can change that belief, then you can start building it up and look at it from a more positive perspective. But on a day-to-day basis, it starts with awareness. It's like, oh, I'm looking in the mirror here now, and I think, oh, I really don't like, I don't like the size of my bum, whatever. And just be aware of the fact that you're thinking that. That's the first step. Don't try to change it right then, because it probably won't. You won't do that in one day. But just be aware of the fact that you're thinking that. That already is the biggest step. Be aware of that you're thinking negatively. And then the moment you think that, you think, okay, what kind of thought would I like to replace that with?
Well, better one, positive one.
A more positive one. But there's more to it than this, but this is on a day-to-day basis. That
was sent in by Charlie, so thank you, Charlie, for sending the question.
It's interesting because we are kind of we're talking and looking at the kind of different approaches to mental health, but what I'm hearing actually is exactly the same. We use slightly different language, but from my perspective, if you like, what we would help in response to the question is, I think the same that you're saying, Nicole, is that you help people to become aware of when they're feeling what they're feeling, and then I would then try and help them to be aware of what the thought is preceding that. And one of the things I'm just going to throw out there really is, because I hear it quite a lot, is that people talk about, I've got to go from negative thinking to positive thinking, and it's very black and white. And I kind of say, well, I don't know how I don't whether you agree or not. I don't know how realistic that is, because if you've got a kind of blindly positive view of the world and your life, I don't know how helpful that is, because there are times when things are difficult. Maybe more of a balanced perspective is going to help change how you feel. So that would just be a slightly different way of talking about and thinking about the same thing. But once you've got an awareness of that process, the thinking and then the feeling, then you kind of you can do something about it. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, and I remember when we met up a few weeks ago, an example is that if you're in the middle of that pain, there is no point of saying to someone in that pain, so what kind of thought would you like to replace that with? In that moment, you're going, F you, I feel really crap. You know, if you just experience something extremely traumatic or painful, it's too soon in that moment to try and think something positively. All you can do in that moment is to feel the pain. And what helps me is one mantra when I'm in that is, this too shall pass, this too shall pass, this too shall pass. That's the only thing I just keep saying to myself. It will pass. But in that moment, I mean, man, it hurts. That's why so many people just avoid it. But you gotta feel it.
I've got to feel it. You've got to appreciate it.
And going back to Charlie's question there's something in that, isn't there? I think one thing you can do kind of therapy-wise is help people to gain that awareness, help them to find a more balanced way of thinking. But if you can do that maybe when they're not in the depth of the pain, they're then starting to prepare themselves for if and when that returns, or they go through another difficult phase in their life. So I think you're right. When you're in the depths of it, it's really difficult to hear it as an individual, or to say it to somebody else.
And actually, if you don't mind me adding something to that, is one of the things that when I was in the lowest part of my life, so to say, I couldn't hear anyone giving me any advice. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't hear it. I couldn't take it from anyone or from no one. They just had to back off and leave me alone, basically.
Just going to pause you there, only because we've had something come back in from Charlie as well, which leads on very nicely from what you're saying.
There we go.
Charlie again says, I'm always told consistency is key. How can someone learn to be more consistent? For example, meditating daily to become more mindful to prevent negative thinking from having a long-term impact.
How can it be consistent?
Consistency is key. How can someone learn to be more consistent? As in, how can they learn to be more consistent? How can you teach yourself to do those exercises every day? So we've established that we need to change our thinking. We've established that mindfulness, meditation, grounding, all the things we talk about on Healthy Minds to do it. But like Charlie says, it's like exercise, isn't it?
It's practice.
Practice.
Well, I have a very interesting perspective on. I'm actually curious to hear what you think here, Hector, as well. Is because I think you can look at this in a very almost scientific approach as well, which is that
science.
Well, and
science is good.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but now what I know is that our brain gets wired from a very early age, usually about basically it's there to keep us safe.
Yeah. So
whenever we experience something and we survive it physically, your brain marks it as something that is safe. The experience itself is safe.
Okay.
Even if that experience, when you look at it from a very rational perspective, isn't necessarily the best thing for you, which is why a lot of people, when they experience abuse, but they survive it, they get into their brain marks it as something as safe. So they will, that same brain will do everything in its power to get you back in the same scenarios, because that brain knows that scenario, you've survived it before and you can survive it again, which is why it is so difficult to come out of addiction, for example, because your brain is literally wired against your favor. So when it comes to changing habits, and this is something that you find with meditation or anything, it's a process of rewiring your own brain. But when you start doing that, your brain will start literally saying, hey, but this is a new experience. We've never done this before. Are you sure? Are you really sure you want to change? Are you really sure? Which is why when you sit down in meditation, your brain just goes, I don't like this. I really don't like this. Oh, I can't do this. This is not for me. No, why am I even trying this? I can never shut up. No, this is not me. And after 5 minutes, they give up. it's and this is where what I call space holding comes in for yourself. You can learn how to do it for yourself, and this is something that I teach others to do for other people as well.
Okay.
Is to again be aware of the fact that your own brain in this sense is quote unquote working against you, and you have to just create the new experiences, because the moment you create new experiences, your brain will mark them as safe as well. So the more positive experiences you create, the more positive, your brain will actually work in your favor, saying, oh, but we survived that meditation session of an hour last week. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we can do it again. And that's
you learn new.
But literally, and it takes at least 3 weeks, they say, to learn a new habit.
Yeah, 21 days to learn a habit and 28 days to stop a habit.
Is that what it is?
Or is it the other way around?
Well, I mean, I think that's what I meant by just following on from what you're saying, Nicole. I think that's what I meant by kind of practice, that actually practicing to do something over time then starts to reinforce the benefits of doing that. I think that's kind of what you're saying, isn't it?
What I find so much is that there's judgment when you're practicing, judgment about why can I not do this?
Mm-hmm.
People want to be good at it right away. And it is practice, but also it really helped me to know how my brain works in that sense, and to just be more compassionate towards myself, and thinking, okay, I don't have to do this right away. I don't have to do this.
So, I mean, I'm just going back to Charlie's question then about how to be, how do you learn to be consistent? Practice, but also maybe it's about expectation. I wonder what the expectation, just what you said then made me think about, what's the expectation that we put on ourselves when we start learning something new? Is it that I have to be, consistent immediately at this new task or skill or whatever you want to call it? And maybe we just, if we change our expectation, maybe the pressure comes off, and then maybe it's just kind of a bit easier, and we're a bit more relaxed when it comes to learning new things, trying to be a bit more consistent in the new skill or whatever. So that might be something for Charlie to think about. That is.
I'm going to stop you there because I'm going to take a break now. I'm going to send an SOS out because we've only got one tea bag and there's 3 of us that want a cup of tea.
No!
So if anyone local can drop some tea bags in, we would greatly appreciate it. We're going to cut to a couple of tunes just while we all get a cup and a little refreshment here because we've got dry mouth, where all 3 of us will be back very, very shortly. So don't go anywhere. Thank you very much for listening. We're back with Healthy Minds, Healthy Lives.